In 1934, a 20-year-old artist vanished into the Utah desert on a journey he knew he might never return from. Everett Ruess left behind letters that read like suicide notes, yet searchers found no body, only 2 donkeys and a cryptic inscription carved into stone. Welcome to History Snapshots. This is the story of the forgotten explorer who turned his life into a disappearing act. Everett Ruess wasn't your typical adventurer. Born in 1914 to artistic, educated parents in Oakland, California, he grew up reading poetry and painting watercolors. But by age 16, something shifted. He began taking solo expeditions into the American Southwest, the deserts of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. His parents worried, but Everett was intoxicated by something they couldn't understand: the sublime terror of wilderness. His letters home were lyrical, almost mystical. He wrote of wanting to merge with the landscape, to dissolve his identity into rock and sky. By 1934, he'd adopted multiple aliases during his travels: Lan Ramo, Everett Ruess, and finally, in his last known inscription, Nemo, Latin for nobody. It was a clue to what he'd been planning all along. Everett's final correspondence reveals a young man who wasn't lost. He was leaving. In November 1934, from the remote town of Escalante, Utah, he wrote to his brother, "As to when I shall visit civilization, it will not be soon, I think. I have not tired of the wilderness. Rather, I enjoy its beauty and the vagrant life I lead more keenly all the time." But there was something else in those letters, a finality. He told his parents he might not return for months, perhaps years. He spoke of beauty worth dying for, of wanting to experience the edge before settling into ordinary life. His last letter, dated November 11th, ended with an eerie declaration: "I have been thinking more and more that I shall always be a lone wanderer of the wilderness." 3 days later, he entered Davis Gulch with 2 burros and enough supplies for weeks. He was never seen again. When his family finally convinced authorities to search in March 1935, they found his burros in a makeshift corral. His camping gear was neatly arranged, and on the wall of an ancient granary, carved into the stone, was the word Nemo and the date 1934. Everything suggested a planned departure, not an accident. The search for Everett Ruess became one of the Southwest's most enduring mysteries. Local Navajo guides, ranchers, and federal agents combed the canyons. Some theorized murder, perhaps by cattle rustlers or indigenous peoples. Others suspected a fall from a cliff, his body lost in the labyrinth of slot canyons. But the evidence didn't support these theories. His possessions were undisturbed, no signs of struggle, no blood. And that inscription, Nemo, felt too deliberate to be the work of someone about to die accidentally. Over the decades, alleged sightings surfaced. A Navajo elder claimed Everett had been killed by tribal members for violating sacred sites, his body hidden in a crevasse. In 2009, DNA testing on remains seemed to confirm this story, until further analysis proved the bones belonged to someone else entirely. The truth is simpler and more unsettling. Everett Ruess likely did exactly what he said he would. He walked into the wilderness and never came back. Not because he was killed, but because he chose oblivion over ordinary life. Was this courage or madness? Perhaps the desert doesn't distinguish between the two. Everett Ruess's disappearance transformed him from a missing person into a myth. In the decades after his vanishing, his writings were collected and published. His watercolors and block prints, once dismissed as amateur work, became prized artifacts. Poets, environmentalists, and wanderers adopted him as a patron saint of radical freedom. John Krakauer referenced him in Into the Wild, comparing Everett to Chris McCandless, another young man who died seeking transcendence in nature. But the comparison reveals something darker about our culture's romance with self-destruction. We celebrate these stories because they flirt with a fantasy most of us suppress, the desire to abandon responsibility, to disappear completely. Everett understood this. In one letter, he wrote, "I have been flirting pretty heavily with the idea of inscribing my initials in the rock somewhere, so that in future ages, people will know that I have been here." He wanted to be remembered, but only as an absence. A ghost, The ultimate artistic statement, life itself is a vanishing act. His family never recovered. His mother spent decades hoping for news, any news. His brother Waldo carried the weight of survivor's guilt, wondering if he could have stopped Everett's final journey. They became collateral damage in his pursuit of beauty. The desert Southwest has swallowed countless explorers, but few as willingly as Everett Ruess. His story endures not because it's mysterious, though it is, but because it asks uncomfortable questions about the price of authenticity. He rejected the Depression-era world of his parents, the industrial grind, the compromises of adulthood. He wanted purity, immediacy, the raw encounter with existence. And he got it, at the cost of everything else. Modern searchers still comb Davis Gulch, hoping to find remains, a journal, some final proof. But perhaps the desert has already given its answer. Everett Ruess found what he was looking for, a place where identity dissolves, where the self becomes landscape. He called it beauty. Others might call it hell. In his final known words carved into stone, he signed himself as nobody. And in the end, that's exactly what the wilderness made him. A name without a body, a story without an ending, a young man who proved that some journeys are only ever one way. The desert keeps its secrets, and Everett Ruess became one of them. Not lost, but transformed into absence itself, the ultimate explorer's fate, and perhaps his greatest work of art.